Can you give me three quick practical examples of the first step, which was cut?
Yeah. So let's look at three quick examples, keeping in mind that there are many what I call red flags, many types of cuts, and that's what we talk about in the workshops. So we'll just talk about three. It is important to keep in mind the fact that Ms. Smith was 17 when she signed the contract. Based on this fact, we conclude that the contract is invalid. Okay, that's your first draft. Your first draft is never going to be great, which is fine because you're going to do your great writing in the edit. And now you're looking for an opportunity to cut. And if you look for it, you'll find it. In this case, the red flag is throat clearing phrases. You know, it is important to keep in mind the fact that what
What
is
should be
that
noted?
sentence about?
Yeah. Hmm.
What is that sentence about? You don't know because I haven't said anything. I'm just clearing my throat, on paper, getting ready to actually say something, and then comes the subject and the predicate. Miss Smith was 17 when she signed the contract. Based on this fact, we conclude that. And so we cut those two throat clearing phrases, and suddenly the sentence is less than half as long. The contract is invalid because Ms. Smith was 17 when she signed it.
It's true. It's very clear and a lot easier to understand. You get to the point quicker.
Yeah, and the reason why I call it a red flag is it doesn't mean cut it. It means wake up,
Hmm.
you know, think. The bad news is you still have to think. Because sometimes you'll decide that you're going to keep it. It's a case by case basis. We conclude that sometimes you'll say that. But if you don't have a reason, if you don't have a good reason to say it, cut it, because if you don't, you're wasting the reader's time.
Hmm.
Uh, and by the way, another reason why it's a red flag is because it's so common in legal writing.
It's true. I see it a lot. Sentences like
So,
always, like it should be noted that.
yeah, it should be noted that it must always be remembered that we must never forget that, and by the way, this is a very easy red flag to spot because it's almost always at the beginning of the sentence. It almost always ends with the word that, and now you're awake and now you see it and you can ask yourself, do I need it? And if not, you cut it.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the next one. The reason why I might miss the deadline is because I'm checking for violations of the code that could possibly result in criminal prosecution. If referred to the appropriate governmental authorities, I promise it will not happen again in the future. And, if I gave you some time, you would come up with cuts. Uh, I'm going to give you the answer.
Hmm.
The reason why means because.
Hmm.
Could means possibly. And so these are redundant. If referred to the appropriate governmental authority is implicit, in other words, obvious. And it will not happen again is a promise, obviously, about the future, and you can cut it. And so another big red flag is redundancies and implied information, which often mean the same thing.
Hmm.
I might miss the deadline because I am checking for code violations that could trigger criminal prosecution. It will not happen again.
It's impressive.
And if I asked you, Angelica, which would you rather read, the blue or the red? You would
The blue one, of course.
almost certainly say the blue, which is one of the great things about my job is I don't have to convince anybody uh, because it's obvious. If you're the reader, you prefer the blue.
Yes. This concerning
Finally, the
documents
provisions of
can
Law
be hidden.
22 do not provide detailed regulations in regard to IT security. This one's a bit difficult. Rarely do I get the best answer. Maybe it's pretty easy to spot the provisions of could be cut, and you just say law 22. And so that's another red flag. The contents of, you could cut, but the big cut is, nominalization, meaning instead of provide regulations, regulate. Law 22 does not regulate IT security in detail. And so this is another red flag. We talk about many, but every red flag that we talk about is very, very common. And so there's a almost 100% chance that any participant in the workshop is at least sometimes nominalizing. And that just means that instead of the real verb, regulate, they add a suffix, regulation, it becomes a noun. You still need a verb, but it's not the real verb. It's a weak surplus verb. Provide regulation. And again, if you look at the blue and the red, everybody prefers the blue, not only because it's shorter, but it's actually much more interesting. It's more dynamic because it's the real verb in the position of the verb.
Mm-hmm. It's true.